question I often get is, how do you get into comics? Where do you start? With the years of continuity and the endless amounts of series, it can be hard to find a starting point. That's why I have this series. I'll be going through this week's new books, looking at new series to be aware of, comics starting new arcs, as well as trade paperbacks and graphic novels coming out this week, finishing up with my starting point of the week, the starting point I am most excited about. So let's start off by taking a look at the new series starting this week. We will start with Marvel in the Land of the X-Men for Exceptional X-Men #1, as From the Ashes continues. This is written by Eve L. Ewing with art by Carmen Carnino. This is set to be focused on the character of Kitty Pryde. She's trying to live a normal life after the fall of Krakoa. She's trying to be a bartender. She's trying to go on dates. Basically the opposite of fighting villains and the government. But of course, she is an X-Man and she has friends like Emma Frost, so one would assume things are going to happen outside of the norm. I've always been a fan of the relationship of Kitty Pryde and Emma Frost ever since Astonishing X-Men in the early 2000s, so happy to see that be a focus of another comic. A lot of the other characters within this team, based upon the cover, I'm not super familiar with. I will say that the vast majority of the new series that have started with From the Ashes have been pretty good starting points, even if you skipped over the Krakoa era. There are some ties here and there, but overall it's pretty easy, pretty standard X-Men stuff for the most part. So interested to see how this team handles it. Also like the fact that it's not tied to Uncanny or the Activeless X-Men. We haven't really seen a book with this title before, so maybe that does give them a little bit more freedom, even if that does sound a bit silly. But if you've been trying to start these new X-Men books with this new era, if you've been outside of the X-Men and just wanted to peek back in for a little bit, you want to check out this new book. We are staying in the world of Marvel as we're getting a new Marvel Zombie book with Marvel Zombies Dawn of Decay #1. Here, a new zombie virus is unleashed and Groot is patient zero. Honestly, I don't know if you can get new life with this concept, no pun intended, considering the fact that the first Marvel Zombie book came out nearly 20 years ago. We, of course, have just gotten Deceased from DC, which took their own spin on the idea. We just had a summer of vampires, so is there room for another zombie story? I'm not super familiar with this creative team, but at the same time, I could also see this being a book you give some creators to say, hey, prove yourself, take an idea that shouldn't work and do something new and interesting with it. So maybe something good can come out of this, who knows? Plus, if you're a zombie fan, if you're a Marvel fan and you want to see more of that together, hey, you have it. I know there are a lot of Marvel zombies out there, so if you want more of that, you got it this week. All right, let's move over to DC for Plastic Man No More #1. This is written by Christopher Cantwell with art by Jacob Edgar. And the premise of this is the fact that Plastic Man is sadly losing his powers, and it's probably going to cost him his life. Before doing so, though, he's trying to make amends for some of his past sins, especially his time as a criminal before he became a superhero, including trying to connect with his son, who may have inherited more than just his stunning good looks. As a fan of Christopher Cantwell's work on things like Iron Man, or even the TV show *Halt and Catch Fire*, I do feel like this leans into his strength as a writer, his ability to write these characters that are emotionally stilted, trying to kind of overcome their own ego and reconcile with their past in order to make for a better future. And I also like the fact that we're getting a new DC series focused on Plastic Man. There really hasn't been a lot. I think the last one was a few years ago, and it's always great when we get a new DC book that's not at all connected to Batman. You know, it's always nice to get more characters out there. Also, with this being a Black Label book, you don't have to worry about past continuity, plus you can have a finite ending, which is not always the case when it comes to superhero stories. So hopefully this is a comic that can live up to its potential and it gets support it needs so we can get more like this in the future. All right, well, let's take a break from the big two and head over to Titan Comics for Conan Battle of the Black Stone #1. This is written by Jim Zub with art by Jonas Garf. And in this, Conan is haunted by a mysterious symbol etched in the black stone. And there's this evil that looms over his age and every age connected to it. And he realizes it's going to take more than a lone barbarian, despite his might, in order to stop this. And it's going to be a march upon time, space, and sanity. I thought Titan has done a really good job of living up to the legacy of Conan in the world of comics. It may sound odd, but Conan has a lot of great comics throughout the years. I'm no Conan expert, but I've been reading a few over the last few years, and you realize just how great a character he is when he's placed with the right creative team. And I thought Jim Zub has done a good job thus far with a number of his books. This appears to be the first time that Titan is trying a Conan-like event, in the sense of there'll be more characters involved in this. I'm not sure what characters those will be, but I know we've seen a few in other Conan miniseries that are backstories and things like that. Perhaps that will be the case, but looking forward to seeing how this plays out with this miniseries. Okay, let's head over to Dark Horse for Duck and Cover #1. This is written by Scott Snyder with art by Raphael Albuquerque. And yes, if you're a fan of American Vampire, that team is reuniting for this series. And this series was actually previously released digitally through Comixology, but now it's getting a physical release for Dark Horse. And I have read this previously, but I do know that some people don't like digital comics, so I won't give anything away. I will say I did rather enjoy it. If you love 60s science fiction, especially science fiction stories that focused on the threat of nuclear attack or the impact of it, especially those monster movies like Them, I think you'll rather dig this. It's certainly a love letter to movies of that nature. Movies play a big part of this story throughout the series, and I do think Albuquerque's art meshes with that time frame rather well. You would think so, you know, with American Vampire, the Americana of his ability to kind of capture that spirit is really good. So it's a really solid series thus far. This tends to be an overextended issue. It's 56 pages for $4.99, so I do think you get a great deal in that. So if that sounds great, if you're a Scott Snyder fan, may want to check it out. Let's take a look at the final new series, at least for right now, with The Autumn Kingdom #1. This is written by Colin Bunn with art by Christopher Mitten. The story focuses on an author who travels to Sweden with his family to finish his most recent dark fantasy novel. And everything seems great at first in the cabin in the wood with his family, but as we know, when it comes to cabin in the woods, bad things tend to happen. They find this mysterious location with these statues, and then perhaps an evil follows them home. Looking at this, it does seem like it is taking a lot from folklore, fairy tales, things of that nature. And Colin Bunn is one of the most prolific writers in comics right now. I don't know how he makes as many books as he does, but when his horror books work, they really work. I'm thinking of something like Harrow County, and this feels like it could have similar vibes to that. If you're a horror fan, you may want to check this out. I don't love everything Colin Bunn does, but at the same time, I don't think I've ever read a bad book by him. His consistency is pretty incredible, and hopefully that maintains with this series. Now that we looked at the new series starting this week, let's take a look at the current series starting new art. I'm going to start with The Ultimates #4, written by Denise Camp with art by Phil Noto. And some may argue this isn't really the start of a new arc, but I'm including it for a few reasons. First and foremost, this is going to be the introduction into what happened to the Fantastic Four in this new Ultimate Universe, which we've not seen before, so it should be a good jumping on point. Also, author Denise Camp has said a lot on Twitter regarding the importance of this issue and what it means to the Ultimate Universe, also saying that this may be the reason Robert Downey Jr. returned to the MCU. Now, I think he's being a bit facetious with that, and people maybe took him more seriously than intended, but I gotta love a guy trying to get people to read his books. I do think it is going to be an important issue, though, especially if you've not read the Ultimate Universe thus far. This series has been my favorite out of that entire run. It does feel like it is doing something new with Marvel. You know, it's not just darker versions of characters we already knew, which became the norm with the first Ultimates run. I feel like they're doing something different, especially last issue when they did give us a different version of She-Hulk. and what it meant to be impacted by gamma radiation. It's been a lot of intriguing ideas, taking Marvel and trying to find new life with it, which is something I've rather appreciated. So if you've been hesitant to go into the Ultimate Universe, check this out. Also interested in seeing how they take on Doctor Doom. So far, he's been a hero, but we know Doctor Doom, that's not who he tends to be. So what else is going to be happening here? I'm excited to see. I think this is going to be a landmark issue for this new Ultimate run. All right, let's move over to DC for Poison Ivy number 25. And this has quietly been one of DC's best books for a few years now. So you've not caught up with it. This is a perfect opportunity to do so, because not only is this going to have a story from the typical creative team, but this being a 25th issue, it's going to include a number of creators telling stories about Poison Ivy's past, present, and possible future. And one good thing that the series has done is tell Poison Ivy's story that's not really trying to make her into your typical hero. Yeah, she's sympathetic, you understand her plight, but she still has that element of being a villain. She's just dealing with people that are more of a villain than she is. And it's really remarkable that a Poison Ivy book is hitting 25 issues. It's rare for any Marvel or DC book to hit that. That's not a mainstay title, let alone a side character or a villain character of one of Batman's rogues. And I think it's a testament to how good this series has been, and it's good to see that it's been getting the support it deserves, both from fans as well as DC Publishing. The last new comic starting a new arc is Cruel Universe number 2, and the benefit of this series is that it's an anthology series, so it's always starting a new arc because all the stories are self-contained. You can pick up any issue. Doesn't matter if you've never read a comic before, everything should be there for you. Of course, this made a lot of headlines because this was the return of EC Comics, but after that, the question became, well, how good is the comic? And to be honest, I wasn't a huge fan of the horror anthology. It didn't do much for me, but actually enjoyed Cruel Universe number 1 much more. I think in large part because we don't get a lot of science fiction anthology books. There are plethoras of horror anthologies, but rare to see it focused on the science fiction genre. And I thought the first issue did a really good job of having a number of stories that did different things with that genre. And this issue has a lot of talent I'm rather excited about, starting with Javier Rodriguez, who's one of my favorite artists in comics right now. He's doing amazing things with Zatanna for Black Label for DC, so I wonder what he's going to do with this issue. Stephanie Phillips is also a name. Anytime she's putting out a book, I'm checking it out. And Christopher Cantwell, who we mentioned earlier, for his work on things like Thanos and Iron Man. So interested to see what he could do with a short story. Telling a short story is not easy. It's a hard thing to do, but when it works, it can be something special. So hopefully we get some of that with this new installment of Cruel Universe. We looked at new series, we looked at current series starting new arcs. Now let's shift focus to trade paperbacks and graphic novels coming out this week. And we're first going to look at Batman City of Madness. This is written and drawn by Christian Ward. Buried deep beneath Gotham City, there exists another Gotham. This Gotham below is a living nightmare populated by twisted mirrors of our Gotham, fueled by the fear and hatred flowing down from above. For decades, the doorway between the cities has been sealed and heavily guarded by the Court of Owls, but now the door is open and the twisted version of the Dark Knight has escaped to trap and train his own Robin. This is a series I sadly miss, and I'm not really sure why, because I'm a big fan of Christian Ward, especially his use of color, and I'd be interested to see what he does with Batman. I've been out on Batman. I haven't really been enjoying the main book, so that may be why I skipped it. So I'm happy to go and take a look at this in hardcover. I do think Black Label books tend to be the best, especially the oversized issues, and knowing Christian Ward, this feels like it'd be the best way of reading it in one complete sitting. So if you're like me and you missed it out, the hardcover will be out this week. Also this week is Volume 1 of Feral. This is a series I have been keeping up with. I was a big fan of the Stray Dogs miniseries that this creative team also did. I will say, though, the pacing of this has been a bit different. I think this series took a little bit longer to get going, which makes sense because this is an ongoing compared to Stray Dogs, which was a miniseries. And being a zombie story, it takes a little bit for these characters to be established, and they are the story. The animation has been strong, or I should say the cartooning has been strong since the beginning. It does have that animation-like quality. It is weird seeing what looks like a Disney movie, but within the zombie genre, but that, of course, is part of the fun. And I do wonder how this would read in trade. Of course, the easy comparison would be something like Walking Dead, which I read in trade and enjoyed much more that way compared to reading at issues. Maybe that will be the same, but I do think if you did enjoy Stray Dogs and wanted something more similar to that, I think you'll be happy with this volume, and you can check it out and get caught up with the ongoing, which hopefully will go for a very long time. Moving back to DC, we're getting the trade paperback for Amazon's Attack, and this is spinning out of the pages of the current Wonder Woman run, where an Amazon apparently attacked someone, causing a lot of people to die, which led the United States to ban all Amazons, and this was their response. Even though I've been really enjoying the current Wonder Woman run, I skipped over this, mainly because it didn't include really any of the same creative team, and usually that's not a very good sign. But seeing it's written by Josie Campbell, whose work I've really enjoyed, specifically what she's been doing with Boom over the last few months, beginning to regret that decision. So now I have a good opportunity to go back and see if this can add any additional context to what's going on in Wonder Woman, as well as just being a good story in its own right. Also, if you enjoy these different Wonder Woman characters outside of, of course, Wonder Woman herself, you have an opportunity to read a story focused on them. So if you're like me, skipped over it, you're interested in checking it out, it's hitting trade this week. Next, we're going to take a look at Elseworlds Superman Volume 1. This is a collection that includes Superman Speeding Bullets, Superman Cal, Superman Distant Fires, Superman A Nation Divided, Superman Incorporated, and Superman War of the Worlds. Many of these stories have not been in print in some time, but finally they're getting a new life with this collection. As a fan of Elseworlds, I'm happy this moniker is back. Not only are we getting collections like this, but also new series that have that moniker, and it never really went away. Of course, it was just given different names. I guess you could say something like DC's is an Elseworlds books, for example, or a lot of the Black Label, but there's something about Elseworlds that makes it seem special. A lot of these stories within this collection I've never read, and I love the fact that we're getting a collection like this and giving these a new opportunity to get read by an entire new audience that maybe never even heard of Elseworlds, considering how long it's been away. So if you're a Superman fan, or you've ever wanted to read a Superman book, Elseworlds are a great opportunity because they're self-contained stories. They're not tied to anything else, so you can pick them up, pick up this collection. If you don't like one story, the good thing is you have plenty of others to choose from. And if this does well enough, perhaps we can get another volume of other Elseworlds stories that may be under the radar that people haven't had the opportunity to read in years. And the last graphic novel we're going to look at is William Morris, The Story of His Life. And this is, of course, following the life of the infamous painter. And I'm not going to sit here and say I know a lot about him or really heard about him before I saw this graphic novel, but that's also one of the joys of comics. You can read stories that you enjoy, those that are entertaining, but also get stories like this where you can learn something. And personally, I tend to enjoy biographies in the comic book medium more than any other, especially compared to film. Film tend to be just checklist, a major event, but with comics, I feel like you have more freedom to dive deeper into people's lives, especially when you're focusing on an artist. You can incorporate their style into the story that you're telling. For example, one of my recent comics I read was on Edward Hopper, and I know his paintings, I don't know his life, but I was able to incorporate his style within that story. And looking at the preview art here, it seems like it's doing something similar. So if you're like me and you just want to learn something new, or you are interested in art history, or you want to read a comic that is not about superheroes, is doing something different, may want to check this out as it's hitting shelves this week. All right, it's all come down to this. We've looked at new series, we looked at new arcs, we looked at trades and graphic novels. Now it's time for my starting point of the week. The starting point I am most excited about coming out this week. So let's take a look at what it is. When trying to pick out a starting point of the week this week, there was a number of options. Almost went with the Superman Elseworlds book, but once I saw Jeff Lemire is coming out with a new comic that he's both writing and drawing, everything else took second place. Essex County is my all-time favorite comic, so anytime he's coming out with a book, especially when he's writing and drawing it, I am there immediately, and this seems to be leaning into what he does best. The story is going to focus on Teresa, who's returning home to help her ailing mother, although begrudgingly. Her mom's a psychic, but obviously a fraud in this small town, and it has caused a divide between them. And a broken family dynamic is something Lemire excels at. You, of course, had that with Essex County, something like Royal Family, so I can imagine the tears that'll be flowing down my eyes by the time this story completes. There's also going to be a bit of a surreal element, because maybe there is some more magic there than Teresa realizes. You've seen that a lot with his books as well. Something even as his last book with Fish Flies and also something like Frog Catchers. You can tell he has a love for things like Twin Peaks with how it leans into surreal. So I think we'd get some of that as well with this book. But as a Lemire fan, happy to see him come out with a new book. It's a bit odd seeing him work with Boom Studios like this. I can't think he's ever done a book like this with Boom. He's of course done a lot with Image, but I gotta say Boom's also done a great job of trying to expand their line. They have a lot of great series right now. Plus we're getting some special covers, including some connections to something like Something Is Killing the Children, which of course is one of the biggest books right now. So of all the new books coming out this week, new arcs, new series, this is one that I am most excited about by far. All right, that's it for me for this week. That's all the starting points. Let me know what starting point you're most excited about. You can also find more of my stuff on TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook, of course, if you're not there already. And also, if you want to check out my article each week, I do my top 10 most anticipated books. That goes live every Monday at nerdinitiative.com. But for now, remember that comics are for everyone. The key is finding the right one.